Just ahead of the first and perhaps only presidential debate between Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, the ex-president reminding us all just why former Vice President Dick Cheney, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, decided to vote for the Democratic nominee this year, why decorated generals and career military officials who despise the very idea of being involved in our politics are speaking out for the first time, why this is not a normal election in any way, certainly not one defined by policy debates. In one fell swoop, Donald Trump laid the groundwork to dispute the 2024 election, just as he did in 2020. He threatened mass arrests of election officials, political opponents, and critics. It landed like a thunderclap in a Saturday night Truth Social post. It read in part, quote, "When I win, those people that cheated will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences so that this depravity of justice does not happen again. Please beware that this legal exposure extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters, and corrupt election officials. Those involved in unscrupulous behavior will be sought out, caught, and prosecuted at levels unfortunately never seen before in our country." And now you should know it includes a lot of nonsensical caps, but a couple of long words that make me wonder who wrote it. We decided to read it to you, though, because it's long past time to include what he's saying, to ignore what he's saying, or to dismiss it as the rantings of an angry and embittered and delusional man. He's all those things. But he often sounds addled and confused, and so we gloss over these things. But this time he's lashing out at the justice system and the election system as he faces a trial for an attempted coup and actual prison time for the election interference case. Although all of that is true, the country has been drinking from the fire hose of Trump's lies and conspiracies for so many years now. It often feels like too many of us have become numb to these kinds of pronouncements, these series of threats from Trump. But at this point, 57 days out, to ignore what he's saying is to ignore our political reality and focus instead on a horse race or a tightening of polls. We're not going to do that. Trump is all the things we said. He's addled, he's delusional. The things he writes have bizarre, nonsensical fragments of sentences. They're grammatically incorrect. But he is the Republican presidential nominee, and tomorrow he'll be treated that way. He'll be on stage alongside the only person in the country who could stop him from acting on all the crazy stuff he posted about. Axios reports it like this, quote, "Trump proposed two of the largest ever federal arrests of people living in America, including U.S. citizens, if he's reelected. The other being a roundup of millions of undocumented immigrants. We already know what happens when Trump turns his megaphone on election officials and critics." This from the January 6th Select Committee.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal! You're a threat to democracy! You're a threat to free and honest election! We love America! We love our rights and our freedom! Tyranny will not be allowed in our country. You're a tyrant, you're a felon, and you must turn yourself in to the authorities immediately!
And then about 45 minutes later, we started to hear the noises outside my home, and my stomach sunk, and I thought, it's me. And then it's just, we don't know what's going to, I mean, the uncertainty of that was what was the fear. Like, are they coming with guns? Are they going to attack my house? I'm in here with my kid.
I've lost my name, and I've lost my reputation. I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughter, Shay, to push their own lies about how the presidential election was stolen.
It's turned my life upside down. I no longer give out my business card. I don't transfer calls. I don't want anyone knowing my name.
So what he's posting about is doing that at a national level. And he's going beyond the threats. He's going beyond the proposals that are in black and white in Project 2025 or the promises of his allies and aides that they make day after day in right-wing media. Trump is now making it clear that he will, as the Harris campaign said in a statement, quote, use his unchecked power to prosecute his enemies and pardon insurrectionists who violently attacked our Capitol on January 6th. The Republican presidential nominee promising to imprison scores of political opponents and critics ahead of the first presidential debate with Vice President Harris is where we begin today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With us at the table, Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University, MSNBC political analyst Basil Smykel's here, plus NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard's here. Also joining us, White House reporter for The Washington Post, Tyler Pager's here. Claire McCaskill will be here in a couple of minutes. Vaughn Hilliard, I start with you. There's a sameness to the Trump story, right? It's been going on for 9 years, and we call on you, and you deepen our understanding of what he says. But I think what we know through your lens is there's a deepening of the extrajudicial reliance. There's a deepening of the socializing with his supporters, the potential for violence and mass prosecutions and mass imprisonments. Why?
When we talk about mass potential prosecutions, we're talking about a Department of Justice that is not one run by Bill Barr as Attorney General. You're talking about a White House counsel that is not Don McGahn. You are talking about Donald Trump ensuring in January of 2025 that he surrounds himself by political appointees who want to execute on what could very well be a vast conspiracy charge. You are looking at somebody like Stephen Richer, a Maricopa County recorder. He's a Republican. I just was on the phone with him just a bit ago here. He's one of those elections officials who faced a lot of heat in 2022. And he said his concern looking at a social media post like that from Donald Trump is not only the threat of retaliation come 2025 and the prosecution, but it's the threat that some of these elections officials could very well feel in real time when Trump makes unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. And the target becomes somebody like Stephen Richer, who is unable, because it doesn't exist, unable to prove the fraud or the cheating. And that is where you sort of have this double hit taking place. And then you get to 2025, and we can go much more into this. We're working on a story here in real time about this, because there are allies of Donald Trump who want to ensure that he has an attorney general, and it may not be one that is confirmed by the Senate, but it would be an acting attorney general who can go in and has the same legal capabilities of an attorney general. So you may have Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, Republican members of the Senate who vote no on Donald Trump's pick. But in the meantime, there's a lot that can take place in those first 100 days of administration. And in real time, you could have private citizens now working up what could amount to a vast conspiracy charge to begin the effort to compel a grand jury and begin to see that an indictment comes within short order in early 2025.
If he wins.
If Trump wins. But I will say, though, in 2016, Donald Trump won. He said, though, that millions of other voters that did not count.
And he had that guy from Kansas do that clownish.
Correct, Chris Kobach.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at a reality that Donald Trump, who is claiming that he won in 2020 the state of California, despite losing by 5 million, potentially still claiming voter fraud even if he wins.
So we could spend the next 2 hours sort of going through and unpacking everything you just shared with us. Let me start with this. There will be no Don McGahns or Bill Barr. Let me just remind our audience, I actually think our audience knows, but just for the record, they oversaw the child separation policy. They didn't quit because that was too extreme or inhumane. They oversaw the Muslim. I mean, they were not stewards of benevolence. They were not safeguards of the rule of law. What Don McGahn did is sort of, in a look back, seems to be protecting himself from being an accomplice to obstruction of justice. If you read the second volume of Mueller, maybe the record reflects something else. And what Bill Barr did after putting his thumbs on the scale of justice to the point where he repelled lifelong prosecutors from cases in the department, he said he thinks a coup is too far. So just, with that frame, with Bill Barr and Don McGahn are all the way over here on the right. What is on the other side?
There's an individual by the name of Mike Davis, and I was talking to Mike Davis earlier today. He used to be a Grassley aide. He is somebody who is running a conservative legal group that is aligned with Donald Trump, very close with the likes of Steve Bannon and others. Don Jr. has floated him openly as
Don Jr., who picked J.D. Vance, is still nominating people?
He has openly said that he should be a good acting attorney general, somebody that could, in the first months, execute on what would be those vast indictments. I was talking with Mike Davis earlier. He said he doesn't believe he could constitutionally be the acting attorney general, but there are individuals who could. And Mike Davis told me that, as an example, that Democrats need to be prepared for, again, I keep coming to this conspiracy charge that could come out of Fort Pierce because, as Mike Davis tells me, you had the search warrant execution by the FBI at Mar-a-Lago, which Donald Trump has claimed was unlawful. You could go and have somebody as an acting attorney general go and seek this indictment out of Fort Pierce, where you could potentially have a more favorable jury pool, favorable to Donald Trump. And in that conspiracy indictment, you could loop in the likes of Fani Willis, Matthew Colangelo, Alvin Bragg. Really, I was talking to a legal ethics professor out of NYU a few moments ago. He told me it doesn't take much to get an indictment, as we know, right? The old saying, a ham sandwich. And if they truly indeed want to go through with this, there's little barriers, because if Donald Trump were to implement the executive order, Schedule F, that he did at the very end of his first administration, that Joe Biden rescinded on day one, they would be able to go and fire a vast number of career officials and turn those into political appointment positions. So while you may have some career DOJ officials who would not want to do Donald Trump's bidding, you could argue Donald Trump could very well in those first months come in, move those people out from being career officials, turn them into political appointment positions, and it's not that hard to see how indictments come to there soon after.
Donald